fantasy has a proper reality. That is not to be forgotten. Fantasy is not nothing. It is, of course, not a tangible object, but it is a fact nevertheless.
When you're thinking, you're actually listening to him. Have you ever stopped to wonder about the voice that quietly speaks in your mind when you're alone with your thoughts, the one that sometimes echoes your deepest fears or brightest hopes? Some call it intuition, others see it as their conscience, while many believe it's just the mind at work. But what if I told you this voice is something far more profound, something that has been guiding you, shaping you, and listening to you, even in moments of uncertainty? The inner voice. The idea that our thoughts and inner dialogues are just random or purely personal is a misconception we have carried for centuries. But what if, in every moment of thought, you're actually hearing something far greater than yourself? What if the whispers in your mind are not solely yours, but the echo of a higher presence, one that has been with you from the very beginning? It's a question that beckons a deeper look into the nature of our thoughts. Most of us rarely give much attention to the nature of the thoughts that arise. We assume they are simply part of our daily routine and responses to the world around us. But what if these thoughts are not just products of our experiences or minds, but messages from the divine, messages from the source of all things that want to guide us, encourage us, and sometimes challenge us to grow? Could it be that in every whisper of doubt or every burst of inspiration, we are listening to something beyond ourselves? In the ancient wisdom of Eastern philosophies, such as the teachings of Taoism, the idea of listening to the inner voice is central to living harmoniously with the universe. The Tao Te Ching, written by Lao Tzu, speaks of the importance of quieting the mind in order to hear the voice of the Tao, the ultimate source. The Tao, which can be understood as the flow of the universe, is said to speak in subtle whispers, guiding those who are receptive to its wisdom. The key, Lao Tzu suggests, is to stop forcing and to simply allow things to unfold. When we still our minds, when we truly listen, we hear the subtle guidance of the universe. But how do we hear this voice? How do we know that the thoughts passing through our minds are more than just passing whims or fleeting distractions? The answer lies not in trying to force meaning out of our thoughts, but in learning to trust them. Trust that they are not simply coming from our ego, but from a deeper place, what some call the soul, others the spirit, and some may even call it God. You may recall the biblical parable of Elijah the prophet, who, while seeking guidance from God, found that God was not in the great wind, the earthquake, or the fire, but in the gentle whisper that followed. This story speaks to the very essence of how we listen to the divine. It's not in the loud, chaotic moments that we hear his voice, but in the stillness, in the quiet moments when we pause and allow ourselves to truly listen. Just like Elijah, we are being invited to turn down the noise of the world and hear the whispers that guide us. This voice, the inner voice, has always been a part of us. It's a force that speaks not through forceful commands, but through gentle nudges, soft reminders, and at times, quiet warnings. We often look outside for answers, believing that the world around us holds the keys to our purpose and fulfillment. But the truth is, the answers we seek are already within us. Our thoughts, if we dare to trust them, are the doorway to this deeper knowledge. When we stop and listen to the flow of our thoughts, we can hear the echoes of wisdom that resonate with the teachings of many spiritual traditions. In Christianity, it is said that the Spirit of God dwells within each of us, guiding us toward truth. St. Augustine, in his Confessions, reflects on this idea, expressing that the Lord is present in the deepest places of the human heart. It's not always in the thunderous moments of life that we encounter God, but in the quiet reflections of our thoughts and prayers. The same idea can be found in other traditions as well. In the teachings of Buddhism, for example, the practice of mindfulness is about becoming aware of the present moment and the thoughts that arise. The Buddha speaks of how our thoughts shape our reality and how, by observing our thoughts without attachment or judgment, we can come to understand the deeper truths of existence. In a similar way, the Sufis speak of the still small voice of the heart, the place where one can connect with the divine presence, the source of all things. What's important to understand is that listening to the inner voice requires us to embrace silence. The mind has a tendency to fill the space of silence with noise, distractions, worries, and judgments. The key is to learn how to sit in that silence and allow the thoughts to come, not force them, but let them flow naturally. In this space of stillness, we can begin to hear the subtle voice of the divine, the voice that calls us toward peace, understanding, and love. But hearing the voice doesn't always mean receiving answers in the way we expect. Sometimes the inner voice speaks in riddles or asks us to take actions that don't immediately make sense. The journey is not always about clear answers, but about trust and faith in the process. The voice might challenge us, push us out of our comfort zones, or ask us to grow in ways we never imagined. It's a voice that invites us to step into the unknown and to trust in the unfolding path that is before us. There are moments in life when we might find ourselves in the middle of a decision, torn between different paths, each with its own potential outcome. In these moments, if we tune in and truly listen, we might find that the answer doesn't come from a place of logic or reasoning, but from a quiet knowing that rises from within us. It is this inner wisdom that guides us, not through external circumstances, but through the language of the heart. The key is to remember that we are never truly alone. Whether we recognize it or not, there is an inner presence, a guide that is always with us, whispering, urging, and calling us toward our highest potential. Our thoughts, if we choose to pay attention to them, are not random. They are the channels through which this presence communicates, whether we recognize it as the divine, the universe, or simply our own higher selves. When you think, you're not just thinking, you're listening, you're receiving guidance, you're connecting to a force greater than yourself. And in that connection, you might find that everything you need is already within you, waiting to be heard, understood, and followed. The inner voice is not a one-time experience or a sporadic whisper. It is a continuous dialogue, a conversation that never truly ends. This voice is not something that you only hear during times of crisis or moments of deep reflection. No, it is there with you every single day, embedded in your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. The question is not whether the voice is there, it is. The question is whether we are attuned to it. Are we listening? Our thoughts process. When we think, we often believe that we are simply processing information or solving problems. However, every thought that arises in our mind has a deeper origin. It may come from the experiences we've had, the beliefs we've been conditioned to hold, or the people we've encountered. But there is another source, a voice that transcends all these influences, a voice that connects us to the vastness of existence itself. This voice, this inner whisper, is not just a product of our environment or mind. It is a direct line to something much greater than ourselves. This connection is considered sacred. The Christian mystics spoke of the still small voice of God, much like the voice that spoke to Elijah. This voice isn't loud or intrusive. It doesn't demand our attention in the way the world does. Instead, it gently nudges us, guiding us through the twists and turns of life with quiet wisdom. In times of stillness, when we are able to quiet the chaos of our minds, this voice can be heard more clearly. In Hinduism, this inner voice is often described as the Atman, the divine spark that resides within every person. It is the unchanging, eternal essence of who we truly are. According to the Bhagavad Gita, the Atman is never destroyed and cannot be separated from the divine source. It is always present, always guiding, and always available to us. The key to hearing it, however, lies in removing the distractions of the ego, of the world around us, and connecting with the quiet stillness of our own hearts. Just as the ocean is always there, even when waves cover its surface, The divine voice is always present, even if our thoughts, emotions, and external circumstances seem to drown it out. In the moments when we are still, when we turn inward, we may begin to feel a sense of peace, clarity, and understanding. It is as though the noise of the world has been silenced, and we are left with a profound sense of connection to something far greater than our individual selves. To truly listen to the inner voice, we must first learn how to be still. And stillness does not mean merely the absence of external noise. Stillness means quieting the turbulence within, calming the mind and opening the heart to hear what lies beneath the surface. The great spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle often speaks of the power of presence, the ability to be fully present in the moment without judgment, without the constant stream of thoughts clouding our perception. This presence allows us to connect with the deeper voice within. Think of it like this. When you are caught up in the rush of daily life, your thoughts often become like an endless stream, rushing forward with no pause, no breath. It's like trying to hear a song while standing in the middle of a busy street. The sounds of the cars, the people, and the noise of the world drown out the music. But when you step into a quiet room, when you listen carefully, you begin to hear the melody, clear and distinct. The same is true for the inner voice. When you quiet the mind, you create space for that voice to speak clearly. But why is it so hard to hear this voice? Why does it seem that at times our thoughts are dominated by confusion, fear, and doubt? The societal influence. The answer lies in the way we've been conditioned to live in the world. From the moment we are born, we are bombarded by external influences, society, family, friends, and the media. These external forces shape the way we think, the way we view the world, and the way we understand ourselves. We are taught to value logic, reason, and external validation over intuition and inner wisdom. The result is that we lose touch with the deeper voice within. Many of us have become so accustomed to relying on external sources of guidance, be it through books, advice from others, or material success, that we forget how to trust the guidance already present within us. And so we seek answers outside ourselves, looking for approval, seeking validation, never realizing that the very answers we seek lie within the quiet recesses of our own hearts. It's as if we've forgotten how to hear the music because we're too distracted by the noise. In some ways, our minds act as a barrier to the inner voice, the constant chatter, the worries about the future, the regrets of the past. They all cloud our ability to hear the wisdom that exists beyond these mental constructs. It's not that the voice isn't there, it's that the mind is too cluttered to hear it. That's where training the mind to be still, to be present, and to listen comes in. When we give ourselves permission to stop the constant stream of thoughts and create space for the inner voice to be heard, in that space the mind becomes a clear, calm lake, reflecting the wisdom that resides within. The act of listening, however, requires patience. It requires trust. Trust that the voice you hear is not your ego trying to manipulate you, but a higher wisdom guiding you toward your true path. It's a voice that will never lead you astray, but it requires you to take that leap of faith and listen without judgment. The key is not to control the voice or force it into a certain shape or meaning, but to allow it to unfold naturally. This process of listening is not a one-time event, but a lifelong journey. It is a relationship, a deepening connection to the divine, to the source of all things. The more you listen, the clearer the voice becomes, and as it becomes clearer, you will begin to trust it more. You will begin to realize that it has always been with you, patiently waiting for you to notice it. At this point, you might be wondering, if I'm truly listening to something deeper, how can I differentiate between the voice of the inner wisdom and the noise of my thoughts? This is an important question because distinguishing between these two forces is a crucial part of the journey. The voice of the inner wisdom is often subtle, while the noise of the mind can be loud, chaotic, and full of distractions. So how do we tell them apart? How the inner voice communicates. The answer lies in the feeling that accompanies each voice. When the inner voice speaks, it doesn't come with pressure, anxiety, or urgency. It doesn't demand that you act right away. Instead, it speaks in a calm, reassuring tone, often accompanied by a sense of peace. There is no rush in its message, no sense of force or manipulation. It simply presents itself gently, like a breeze that brushes past you, quietly urging you to listen. The words it brings are often simple and clear, though they might not always make sense at first. It's the feeling of truth, the deep knowing that resonates within you when you hear it. It is like hearing a song you've known for a long time but had forgotten, the melody immediately familiar when it reaches your ears. The mind, on the other hand, operates in a completely different manner. It is full of chatter, full of concerns about the past or the future, constantly bombarding you with questions, doubts, and judgments. It thrives on control and certainty, always trying to make sense of things, to solve problems. When you listen to the mind, you feel a sense of urgency, a desire to act quickly, and a lingering anxiety that nags at you. There is no peace, no stillness. There is only the constant movement of thoughts, often disconnected from any deeper sense of knowing. To give you an example, when you're trying to make an important decision in your life, whether it's about your career, your relationships, or something personal, your mind might flood you with a series of questions and concerns. What if I fail? What if it doesn't work out? What if people judge me? These are the kinds of questions that arise from the mind, pushing you to doubt yourself, to hold back, to remain stuck in fear. But when the inner voice speaks, it doesn't come with any of that. Instead, it might say something like, "Trust yourself. You already know what to do. Take the first step and the next one will appear." It's a quiet confidence, a feeling that everything will fall into place even though the details are not yet clear. The beauty of the inner voice is that it doesn't demand you understand everything all at once. It doesn't require that you have a roadmap for the entire journey. Instead, it provides you with a gentle, clear direction, one step at a time. It's like a guiding star in the sky, always shining, always there, even if you can't see it during the day. When you listen, you follow that light, trusting that it will lead you where you need to go. Think about a time when you've experienced that inner nudge, that feeling that something was right, even when logic or external factors suggested otherwise. Perhaps you were faced with a choice that seemed daunting, something that others might have cautioned you against, but deep down, you knew it was the right thing to do. That was your inner voice guiding you. It may have been a whisper, barely audible over the noise of your mind, but it was there, and if you trusted it, you likely found that the outcome was more aligned with your true self than anything you could have planned with your mind alone. Now, this doesn't mean that the inner voice always speaks in ways that are immediately clear or easy to follow. Sometimes the messages it brings can be challenging or uncomfortable. It may ask you to step outside your comfort zone, to make difficult choices, or to confront fears you've been avoiding. But even in these moments, the voice remains steady and calm. It doesn't come with judgment or criticism. It simply invites you to step forward, to grow, to trust. In moments of doubt or confusion, know that the inner voice is always aligned with your highest good. It will never lead you astray. Even if the path seems difficult, even if the choices seem tough, the voice is always guiding you towards something greater. Sometimes, the journey to understanding and growth requires us to face uncomfortable truths or take bold steps, but these are the very things that help us evolve and connect more deeply with our true selves. A powerful parable from the Taoist tradition illustrates this point. In the story, a farmer's horse runs away, and his neighbors come to offer their condolences, lamenting the bad luck. But the farmer responds, "Who knows what is good or bad?" A few days later, the horse returns, bringing with it several wild horses. The neighbors, surprised by this turn of events, congratulate the farmer on his good fortune. Again, he simply responds, "Who knows what is good or bad?" Later, the farmer's son is thrown from one of the wild horses and breaks his leg. Once again, the neighbors express their sympathy, but the farmer's response remains the same. Eventually, the country goes to war, and all the able-bodied young men are drafted except for the farmer's son, whose broken leg makes him ineligible to fight. The farmer's life, full of twists and turns, illustrates the uncertainty of our judgments about what is good or bad. The inner voice doesn't operate on the basis of good or bad, it simply guides us to the next step, with full trust that, in time, we will see the wisdom in its direction. This is why it's so important to cultivate the practice of listening, not just when things are going well, but also when they seem difficult or uncertain. The inner voice has a way of leading us through challenges, not by avoiding them, but by helping us navigate them with clarity and grace. It teaches us that every experience, every moment, has something to offer us, and that growth often comes from the most unexpected places. Listening to the inner voice. The more you trust it, the clearer it becomes, and the more you realize that it's been with you all along, patiently waiting for you to tune in. The real question becomes not whether the voice is there, but whether you are willing to listen and follow its guidance. Listening to the inner voice is not just about hearing words or receiving instructions, it's about developing a deeper connection to the essence of who you truly are. You see, the inner voice is not something external or separate from you. It is the very heart of your being, the wisdom that lies beyond the mind's constant chatter. It is that part of you that knows, with unshakable certainty, what is best for you, even when the world around you suggests otherwise. Think about how often we get caught in the trap of looking outside of ourselves for answers. We turn to others for advice, we seek validation from friends, family, or even strangers, and we search for signs in the external world to confirm what we should do. This is the noise of the world, pulling us in 1,000 directions and leading us away from the quiet wisdom that lies within. But the truth is, the most profound answers lie within you. The key is learning how to quiet the outside noise and listen deeply to the voice of your soul. It is often said that the mind is like a clouded sky, filled with swirling thoughts, emotions, and judgments. But just as the sky itself remains unchanging, beneath all that noise, there is a deeper clarity that is always present. The inner voice is the clear sky within you, always steady, always calm. It is the part of you that remains unchanged by the fluctuations of your thoughts and emotions. It is your true essence, beyond the ego, beyond the limitations of the mind. The practice of listening to this voice is not one of force, but of surrender. It's about letting go of the need to control, to analyze, and to figure everything out. The mind, with all its constant thinking, wants to understand everything, dissect every situation, and plan for every possible outcome. But the inner voice doesn't need to understand it all. It simply knows. It knows that everything is unfolding as it should, and that all you need to do is listen and trust. This practice of surrender is seen as the highest form of wisdom. The Bhagavad Gita, a sacred text of Hinduism, teaches the importance of surrendering to the divine will. In the text, the hero Arjuna is caught in a battle between his duty and his personal desires. He is confused, afraid, and unsure of what to do. It is only when he surrenders his will to the guidance of Lord Krishna, who represents the divine wisdom within him, that he is able to find clarity and peace. Krishna's message to Arjuna is simple: surrender to me and I will guide you. Trust in my wisdom and you will find your way. This surrender is not about giving up your power or losing control. It's about recognizing that the mind, with all its striving, is limited. The ego, with all its desires and fears, cannot see the bigger picture. But when you surrender to the inner voice, you open yourself to something far greater than the mind's understanding. You align yourself with the wisdom of the universe and the flow of life itself, and you begin to move with greater ease and grace. The inner voice knows that every moment is an opportunity for growth and transformation. It knows that every challenge you face is a lesson in disguise, a chance for you to deepen your understanding of yourself and the world around you. But the mind often resists this truth. It sees challenges as obstacles to be avoided or conquered rather than as opportunities for growth. It becomes afraid of uncertainty and of the unknown and tries to control every aspect of life. This is where the practice of listening becomes even more important. When life becomes uncertain or difficult, the mind's voice grows louder, filled with fear and doubt. But in these moments, the inner voice is even more crucial. It is the stillness beneath the noise, the calm in the storm. If you can learn to tune into it, even in the midst of chaos, you will find a deep sense of peace and clarity that transcends the external circumstances. Take a moment to reflect on a time when you faced a difficult situation. Perhaps it was a relationship challenge, a career setback, or a personal struggle. In that moment, you may have felt overwhelmed by fear or uncertainty. But looking back now, you may see that this challenge led to growth in ways you couldn't have imagined at the time. This is the nature of life's wisdom. It often guides us through discomfort, but always toward greater wisdom and understanding. When you listen to the inner voice, even the toughest situations become opportunities for personal transformation. Another way to deepen your connection with the inner voice is by quieting the mind and creating the space necessary to hear the subtle guidance of your inner wisdom. In this stillness, you can observe your thoughts without becoming entangled in them. You can simply watch as they come and go, without judgment or attachment. This practice allows you to step back from the noise of your mind and connect with the deeper part of yourself that knows. In the Christian tradition, there is a beautiful parable about the importance of listening to God's voice. It is the story of Elijah, who is seeking guidance from God. Elijah expects to hear God's voice in a dramatic way, through thunder, fire, or an earthquake. But instead, he hears a still small voice, a whisper. This quiet, subtle voice is where true wisdom is found. It is the voice of God, the voice of the inner wisdom that speaks to us in moments of stillness. This whisper may be quiet, but it is powerful. It is the voice that leads us on the right path, even when we can't see the road ahead. It is the voice that guides us toward love, toward peace, and toward our highest good. And it is always available to us, whenever we are willing to listen. How to cultivate the practice of listening. The voice may be subtle, quiet, and at times even contradictory to what the world around you tells you to do. So, how can we truly trust this voice, especially when it asks us to step into the unknown or when the path seems unclear? Trusting the inner voice requires something more than just intellectual understanding. It requires faith. Faith is not about blind belief. It is the deep knowing that even when the world around us seems uncertain, there is something within us that knows the way. It is the understanding that the voice we hear is not separate from us, but an integral part of who we are. It is the voice of our truest self, our higher self, and it will always lead us in the direction of love, peace, and fulfillment. Faith, however, is not something that comes easily. The mind often resists faith because it cannot see the full picture. It wants certainty, it wants control, and it wants clear answers. The inner voice, on the other hand, often works in subtle ways. It speaks in feelings, impressions, and nudges, guiding us step by step, rather than giving us the entire map at once. And therein lies the challenge. The mind used to seeing the world in black and white terms may struggle with the ambiguity of the inner voice's guidance. But here's the truth. It is precisely in the uncertainty that faith is born. It is in the moments when we don't know what to do next, when the path ahead seems foggy, that we are called to trust the voice that speaks within. We may not have all the answers, but if we are willing to follow that voice, even when it feels risky or uncomfortable, we will begin to see the magic unfold. Life is not simply about reaching a final goal or achieving a particular outcome. It is about the unfolding process, the lessons we learn, and the growth we experience along the way. The inner voice understands this more deeply than the mind ever could. It does not get caught up in the destination. It knows that each moment holds a lesson, a gift, an opportunity for transformation. Take, for instance, the teachings of the Tao Te Ching, an ancient text of Taoist philosophy. In it, the sage Lao Tzu writes, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." The wisdom here is not just in the act of taking a step, but in the recognition that each step is a part of the journey, not something separate from it. The inner voice speaks in terms of these steps, small, sometimes imperceptible moments, guiding us to the next place of growth. When we trust the inner voice, we begin to realize that the journey is not something we are doing to get somewhere, but rather something that is unfolding naturally step by step. And with each step, we are guided closer to our true self, closer to the peace and fulfillment that we long for. The more we trust, the more we realize that every choice, every decision, every moment is an opportunity for the voice to lead us to greater wisdom and understanding. As we continue along this path of listening and trusting, something else happens. The voice becomes louder, clearer, and more direct. It begins to guide us not only in big decisions, but also in small, everyday moments. We start to notice its presence in the little things when we are choosing what to eat, who to spend time with, or how to spend our energy. It's in these moments that the inner voice becomes a steady companion, always available to guide us toward what is most aligned with our highest good. In the teachings of mindfulness, there is an emphasis on being present in each moment and fully engaged in the experience without being lost in thoughts of the past or future. However, being present also requires us to release attachment to outcomes. Often, we resist following the inner voice because we want to control the outcome. We want to know exactly what will happen next, and we want to ensure that everything turns out the way we expect. But the inner voice operates in a different way. It leads us into the unknown, into the places where we are called to grow and evolve. And sometimes, that means stepping into uncertainty. The inner voice does not always lead us to comfort or security. In fact, it often calls us to step outside of our comfort zones, to face our fears and limitations. But it does so because it knows that only by facing these challenges can we truly grow. Just as a seed must break through the soil before it can reach the light, we must often break through our own fears and limitations in order to reach our highest potential. This process of growth can be uncomfortable. It may feel like we are being stretched beyond our limits, or that we are being asked to let go of things that we have clung to for dear life. But in these moments, the inner voice is leading us towards something greater, a life that is more in alignment with who we truly are. It is only by following this voice, even through discomfort, that we are able to experience the fullness of life. The great mystic Rumi wrote, "Don't grieve, anything you lose comes round in new form." This is the essence of what the inner voice whispers to us. The things we must let go of are not lost, but rather transformed. What we release in one moment may return to us in a new form, more aligned with our true path. The voice is not here to take away from us, but to guide us toward what is most fulfilling, even if it requires us to step into the unknown. The inner voice is not only a guide, but a teacher. It helps us understand that we do not need to control every aspect of our lives. Instead, we need to trust the unfolding, trust the process, and trust the wisdom that is guiding us every step of the way. When we do this, we allow ourselves to live with greater ease, peace, and fulfillment. But the inner voice is not always loud or obvious. It doesn't come with a flashing neon sign or a clear-cut direction. It speaks in subtle nudges, in feelings, in moments of intuition, and sometimes we may dismiss it in favor of the louder, more forceful voice of the mind, which is often dominated by fear, doubt, and external pressure. But there is a way to attune ourselves to this inner guidance, to truly begin hearing it and following it with trust. How to integrate this into your daily life? The first key to listening more clearly to the inner voice is to cultivate silence. In our modern world, we are constantly bombarded by noise, social media, news, conversations, our own racing thoughts. This constant stimulation makes it difficult to hear anything beyond the clamor. But the inner voice requires stillness to be heard. It is in the quiet moments, when we allow ourselves to be fully present and still, that we can hear its whispers. When we sit in silence, we create space for the inner voice to speak. At first, it may seem like nothing is happening. We may feel restless, impatient, or even frustrated by the quiet. But if we continue to sit in stillness, we begin to attune ourselves to something deeper. The more you practice, the more you begin to sense the quiet presence of the inner voice. When we let go of the need to control our thoughts or to chase after the next distraction, we can start to listen to the voice that is speaking to us from within. As we sit in silence, we may begin to notice subtle shifts in our awareness, small nudges or realizations that point us toward what is most aligned with our true selves. In addition to creating space for silence and mindfulness, it is also important to cultivate trust in the voice once we begin to hear it. Trusting the inner voice can be difficult, especially when it seems to go against the expectations or desires of the world around us. The mind wants certainty, and the world often pressures us to conform to its standards of success, happiness, and achievement. The inner voice, on the other hand, may call us to something different, to follow a path that feels authentic, but that may not make sense in the conventional sense. This is where faith comes in. Trusting the inner voice requires us to let go of the need for control and certainty. It requires us to release the fear of making a mistake, or of not knowing exactly where the path will lead. The voice is not here to steer us toward failure or disappointment. It is here to guide us toward our highest potential, even if that means taking unexpected turns or stepping outside our comfort zones. One of the most powerful ways to cultivate trust is through small, everyday acts of listening. Start by listening to the subtle nudges throughout your day. Maybe it's a feeling to pick up the phone and call someone you haven't spoken to in years. Maybe it's an impulse to try something new or to step back from a situation that doesn't feel right. These little moments are opportunities to practice listening to the inner voice and trusting its guidance. In these moments, we don't need to understand everything at once. The voice doesn't demand an instant, clear explanation. It asks only that we listen, take the next step, and trust the process. Over time, as we follow these small nudges, we begin to see the bigger picture. We begin to realize that each small step is part of a greater unfolding journey that is uniquely ours. Another key to listening to the inner voice is letting go of attachment. This means releasing the need to control the outcomes or to know exactly how things will unfold. The inner voice does not offer guarantees or promises of a specific outcome. It simply guides us in the direction that is most aligned with our highest good. When we let go of our attachment to particular results, we create space for the voice to guide us more freely. This practice of non-attachment is beautifully illustrated in the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, an ancient Hindu text. In the Gita, Lord Krishna advises the warrior Arjuna to act without attachment to the fruits of his actions. Krishna tells Arjuna that it is not the outcome of his actions that matters, but the intention behind them. When we act with a sense of purpose, following the guidance of the inner voice, we can release our attachment to the results and trust that they will unfold as they should. The final aspect of listening to the inner voice is embracing the unknown. The inner voice often leads us into uncharted territory, into areas where we cannot see the full picture. This requires a deep trust in the process and in the wisdom of the voice itself. It's like stepping onto a bridge before we can see the other side. We don't always know what's ahead, but we trust that if we take each step, the path will reveal itself. This kind of trust is not passive, it requires action. We must step forward even when we don't know exactly where the path will lead. It is in the act of moving forward with faith that the magic begins to unfold. We begin to see how the pieces of our lives fit together in ways we couldn't have predicted. we begin to witness the synchronicities, the unexpected opportunities, and the connections that arise when we trust the guidance of the inner voice. As you go forward from here, remember this: the inner voice is always there, patiently waiting for you to listen. It does not demand perfection or instant understanding. It simply asks that you show up, be present, and trust the process. As you continue to listen, you will begin to experience a deeper sense of peace, purpose, and fulfillment. The journey is not always easy, but it is always worth it. The inner voice is your guide, your teacher, and your deepest self, leading you toward the life you were always meant to live. All you have to do is listen. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.